Canada. When it's not cold up here, or otherwise really lousy weather, we make a lot of movies. And what a lot of people may not be aware of is that even despite the fact that a lot of Hollywood productions come up here to Canada to shoot, there are also a ton of Canadian films that are just stories that were shot on location in this country but are about Canadian characters, directed by Canadians, and they star Canadians. So we're going to take a minute to talk about that today, so to speak. And on that note, welcome to our show. I'm Evan Mead.
I'm Lyle Groniger.
And for tonight's show, we're welcoming back our episode from the Uncomfortable movie episode where we talked about, movies that make our skin crawl. Mr. Stokes, welcome back, Sean.
That's right, you guys. Welcome back. Thank you.
Yes. So Sean, you've had quite a vision for what Canadian film can be as an aspiring filmmaker yourself, and we wanted to talk about with you some of your favorite films that were made predominantly in this country, and just to kind of show our listeners what the potential is to make a movie about a Canadian story. And we'll give you an example of what we mean, but so
we're each going to go through three particular films from each of us.
Yeah.
And I guess tonight we'll start with you, Sean. We'll go Sean, Evan, and then myself.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so, cool. Okay, well, Evan, you just had like the $1 million question right off the bat. What makes a Canadian tell a true Canadian story? You know what's crazy is that Canadian cinema, if you actually really want to go back to the history of it, you actually go back to the actual foundation of it, the foundation of quote unquote Hollywood, right?
Yeah.
And if you want to go back to like the early beginnings of, say, Max Sennett, she was married to Douglas Fairbanks. What's her name?
Mary Pickford.
Mary Pickford.
Maybe have two Canadian classics, right? And the crazy thing about Canadian cinema is that it doesn't get enough credit, right?
It really doesn't.
No, it really doesn't. There's so many good Canadian stories. However, I feel like there's some. I think the reason is just that because Canadians are more accustomed to seeing American content, and there's almost has to be like a set in guidelines, like an unwritten rule of set of guidelines where Canadians have to take in order to not only get Canadian audiences compelled to see it, but also get American audiences. Because we share the border with the U.S., right? And the U.S. is U.S., right? And they have the most dominant film market on the planet. They have the most, and when you're right next door to that, a lot of our films get so saturated and so, what's the word I'm looking for?
Overlooked?
It's so overlooked, right? Yeah, overlooked, right? And like the first one, it is a flawed film. However, Passchendaele, I feel, is a very important film, not just because it's a Canadian film made by 100% Canadian content that I believe. I could be mistaken, but it's also a very important film because it also shows what Canadians did during a conflict over 100 years ago. It started with the First World War, right?
Yes.
And Passchendaele was the bloodiest, most brutal battle in the entire 4 years that the war went on. Right? And of course, Paul Gross had made a film about it, and he got some of the stuff right. He got a lot of the battle tactics right. He got a lot of really, really basic information. However, there was also some instances where it just becomes a little bit, like I was talking about, where it becomes very Americanized. That's like the best way I can describe it, because it's very Americanized. Like there's like a one scene where a guy gets shot by like a rifle or something, and he just like goes like flying through the air, right?
It makes
it's a little, it is campy, but
it makes Saving Private Ryan look tame.
Yeah, I haven't seen this film, but I've seen a clip of it, and the gore on display there was really, really excessive. What I've seen.
Yeah, it was. There were some points where it was just too. Like, there were some points where it was like, it was appropriate, but then, like, they were like out of like the 10% where it was appropriate, 90% of it was inappropriate. You know what I mean? So, I do. The reason why I do recommend it though, it's just for historical purposes and for the fact that Canadians need to know where our foundation is. Because I feel like we understood our foundation a lot better to be able to actually bring all of these, all of these hidden gems. You know what I mean? Like, we could talk about Riel, we could talk about the ones who were at the road, we could talk about the Halifax explosion, we could talk about the Aurore arrow, but I believe that's for another time. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, I'll be talking about the Aurore next, so.
Yeah, exactly. So.
And there actually was a movie made about the Halifax explosion that I watched in history class many years ago.
But it was like a TV movie, right?
Yeah. A TV movie in my mind is still a movie. So yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. But what I mean is that, like if you compare to, like, say, like Saving Private Ryan to Passchendaele, like, that's what I'm talking about. I mean, I feel like Canadians, we can kind of explore a little further. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, that was Passchendaele.
Cool. I did watch Passchendaele. It's a well done movie. And what's cool about the Toronto and the Canadian film scene is that a couple of the filmmakers, the three of us are going to be talking tonight, are actually filmmakers that I've had the pleasure of speaking to. I don't, because Paul Gross had a movie at TIFF in 2016 called Hyena Road. We're not going to talk about that tonight, but I did go to a screening and I stayed for a Q&A where Paul Gross was actually present afterwards, and I got to ask him a question. The question I actually asked him was, the main character in his movie Hyena Road is a Canadian soldier in Afghanistan named Pete Mitchell, and I'm like, Pete Mitchell is Maverick's real name in the movie Top Gun, and I'm a huge Top Gun fan, so I caught that right away. And I asked him, were you inspired by Top Gun to name your character? Because Pete Mitchell is also Maverick's name. And he's like, he said something along the lines of, it was 5 years ago, so he said something along the lines of, I actually used a different process to pick names. I didn't have any inspiration, but it's cool that you caught that, sir. And I'm like, oh, thanks. But yeah. Yeah, Paul Gross has a unique eye for film. I think he's underrated. He also made a Western comedy called Gunless, which I was kind of tempted to check out. I don't know if any of you guys have seen it. I'm not really... Oh, yeah.
I can't say I'm familiar with his work.
Yeah.
But that's okay.
Yeah.
Maybe something to check out.
Okay. So, now that Sean kind of set the table for historical events that are Canadian historical events that can get turned into films, I'm going to talk about The Arrow. So The Arrow was admittedly a TV miniseries that later was edited into a feature film, a TV feature film distributed by the CBC from 1997. The story of The Arrow is, well, let me put it this way. Imagine The Right Stuff meets Top Gun to a degree, but it's a Canadian story, and just like Passchendaele, this is based on a true story that Canada actually did. In the late 50s, it's the height of the Cold War. Tensions between NATO and the USSR are extremely high. So, and it occurs to the North American Defense Forces that Canada was a part of that. If the Soviet Union ever wants to fly bombers to the United States or Canada, they're not going to go across the Pacific Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean. They're going to go across the Arctic Circle in the north and fly through the Northwest Territories and we wouldn't be able to detect them or stop them until they reached as far as Toronto. And if a Russian bomber gets as far as Toronto, that's an attack on any American city that they want, or Canadian city for that matter. They could take out Ottawa, they could take out Toronto, New York, Chicago, Buffalo, Washington, and we wouldn't have been able to stop them until it was too late. So the Canadian forces realized, oh shit, we have to defend several thousand square kilometers of Arctic airspace, and we don't have an aircraft that can intercept as fast as any other jet in the world. The Americans didn't even have this technology. So the fastest plane we had in our arsenal was the CF-100 Canuck, and it was a clunky but iconic airplane if you're an aviation Canadian nut like I am. So, but it wasn't going to be able to do the job of reaching the Arctic to intercept hypothetical Russian bombers fast enough. So Canada, the movie The Arrow is a story about how Avro Canada was tasked with the impossible. We had to come up with a plane that could reach the Arctic fast enough and come back to base fast enough. And we did test after test, but eventually the plane we built was called the Avro Arrow, the CF-105 Arrow, and she was rolled out on the tarmac at what is now known as Pearson International Airport. Back then it was Avro's testing ground, and it was also used for it was a commercial airport, but it was also used for military testing at the time. But we rolled her out on the tarmac, the Arrow, on a sunny day in October of 1957. And on that same day, the night after we rolled the Avro Arrow out onto the tarmac, the Soviets launched Sputnik into orbit, and that changed the whole conversation. And at the time, we were under the liberal government of Louis Saint Laurent, and the conservative leader, John Diefenbaker, was up for election back then, and he won, and he would remain prime minister for a number of years. And I know this isn't really a political movie, but actually, I know it sounds like I'm getting boring talking about politics, but what this movie does is it not only shows the task we have to, we're faced with as a people and as a military, it also paints the geopolitical climate of Canada in the late 50s and what it was like to interact with the United States and the Soviet Union for that matter. And one of the things going on economically here was, and politically was, we were up for an election, we got a conservative leader, and then once the Arrow was being tested, if you think of this movie in 3 acts, the first act is we gotta build a plane. The second act of the movie is we build a plane, now we gotta test it. The third act of this movie is how our political process killed this plane. And what's truly tragic about this story is Canada built the fastest, most advanced fighter interceptor in the world. The Americans had no such technology that could match ours, and at the time, and they wouldn't have this technology for another 40 years. So, and then the last act of the movie is about how the government killed this project, and what's truly sad is it ends on a fairy tale but optimistic note, where there were 5 prototypes of the Arrow made, and actually no, 6 of them were made. There is a conspiracy theory in this country that the 6th Arrow is hidden somewhere in this country and might still be operational or can be restored. So it's a tall tale, but I'd like to entertain the fact that there is a 6th Arrow out there somewhere, and maybe I'll live to see it fly. And so the movie in terms of star power, the movie stars Dan Aykroyd as Crawford Gordon, who was the somewhat controversial head of Avro Canada at the time. It also stars Christopher...
Why was he somewhat controversial?
Well, because he had an affair, he was an alcoholic, and he also made some shitty business decisions, which also played a factor in killing the program. Like, for example, there's a really intense scene where they had a deal with jet engine manufacturers, where I'm trying to talk about this without sounding boring, but basically the Arrow was meant to have Canadian-built Iroquois engines, the fastest, most powerful engines in the world. But at the engines we were using for the test prototype Arrows were American Pratt & Whitney engines. And there's a scene where the pilot is trying to break a speed record, very similar to a scene in The Right Stuff where Chuck Yeager's in the Bell X-100. But he's trying to break a speed record. Then Crawford Gordon is on the radio telling him, "Do not break this record. If you do that, you'll kill our contract with Pratt and with the Iroquois designers, because they're not going to want an engine they feel is inferior in their plane when Pratt and Whitney can do the job." So there was a battle of egos as to what this plane could do, and it kind of got in the way. But in a tale of geopolitical turmoil, ambition, and wanting to be the best, this project died, and it was sad to see it die. But it's very interesting to see how it died. And the movie, I think, kind of has some cheesy moments with the characters, but I think it tells a really interesting story, at least to me. I mean, how cool is it to know that your country built one of the most advanced weapons known to man, and then we killed it? Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
A heartbreaking story is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what's crazy? Talking about the Canuck, I've actually sat in one.
Oh, so have I.
And oh my God, they're huge. They're huge, but they are a bucket of bolts.
They are. Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, just for the record, I sat in one at the Warplane Heritage Museum out in Hamilton. Yeah, those planes, it feels like it could fall apart any second, but it's a nice piece of history. That's all I can say about the Arrow. It's imagine the right stuff, but Canadian. So that's what I have to say.
Okay, I guess that goes into my turn. My first pick of the night is The Dirties, directed by Matt Johnson. A found footage film shot in your neighborhood, Evan.
Yes, one of the high schools they used for locations of this movie was my high school of Thornley Secondary in Thornhill, Ontario. It is the high school of such controversial figures in Canada like Gian Gomeshi, Alec Manassian. But there's also some really talented voice actors that have gone there too.
Yeah, so The Dirties is about two high school social outcasts named Matt and Owen, who are, aspiring filmmakers, and they're huge pop culture junkies. And together they make a high school project student film. And the idea is that Matt wants to, take revenge on the bullies that pick on him. And so he's like, yeah, we're going to take down the Dirties. The Dirties are the bullies who always, hurt us all the time. And he shows it to his principal, and the principal's like, you can't make a movie like this for school. This is wildly inappropriate. You're, shooting, people and stuff. This is bad. And so Matt kind of takes it hard, and when even though he cuts some of the violence down, he shows it to his classmates, and they all, think he's a total doofus, and make fun of him even harder than before. These boys are always suffering from harassment on an almost daily basis. So eventually Matt kind of cracks a little bit, and he's like, you know what? What if we made this film super realistic, like a documentary, where we actually go out and shoot the Dirties? That would be so cool, wouldn't it? And it gets kind of twisted and depressing by the end to see this optimistic person go completely dark and savage by the end, and it culminates in an actual school shooting. And the entire thing is shot in this cinema verite mockumentary style, where it's very ostensibly I would call it a found footage film.
Yeah. Because
we're watching this cameraman document their conversations while they're shooting their short film.
On that note, Sean, I believe you also know this lady, an instructor from TFS that I've actually become friends with over the years, Maya Bankovic. So shout out to Maya. She was the DP on this film.
I thought Chris. It says here Chris Rabb was. I think she might have been the camera.
Yeah, she was a camera op. Yeah.
Camera operator.
Yeah. So
those are two separate jobs.
Yeah. So we're gonna add that out, but on that note, on the note of camera work, Maya Bankovic, who was one of my instructors at Toronto Film School, was a camera op on this movie. So shout out to Maya for great work on this film. Mm-hmm. She worked under the DP
Chris Rabb.
Chris Rabb, yeah.
Yeah. This was a very, very low budget film. It cost about $10,000. Was paid entirely out of pocket. Eventually, they did have to kind of garner up another $45,000 for the licensing fees, because there's actually quite a soundtrack to this movie. And it was later distributed by Kevin Smith under his distribution banner called Kevin Smith's Movie Club, and that's
Nice.
He even played it as during a Comic-Con, saying you absolutely have to watch this movie. This is like the best movie I've ever seen all year. And Matt Johnson himself, who's a really, really interesting, eccentric fellow, has gone on to create some other projects such as Operation Avalanche and the TV show Nirvana, the Band, the Show, which is a very Canadian show shot entirely in Toronto, and you can tell.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the reasons why I like this movie is that I don't know if it's an accurate depiction of a real school shooter, but the idea of someone who's just, like, kind of crippled with angst and, like, hate is something I really like. The main character, especially in the beginning, is actually rather likable. He reminds me a lot of, like, myself when I was in high school, because he would, like, quote constantly and just shoot videos with his friends or bike down the street at night and just, like, you know, kind of, he enjoys the time he has with, like, the people he cares about most.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting about him is his psyche, because he feels like he's, like, the main character of his own movie. Hence why he records everything, like, he has his, like, cameraman record everything about him, because he thinks, like, he's, like, the hero of his own story. And he's so detached from reality by the end that he believes that evil must be punished, and the fact that it must be captured on video is the only way to give his film an ending, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And that's super interesting, because in one way he's kind of right.
Yeah.
Being that it's a movie and all, but on the other hand, like, it's like when you really, it's almost meta in a way. I really enjoyed the found footage style that Johnson incorporates. It makes me feel attached to the characters in a way that might not have been. Everything feels very candid and unscripted, and that's because it was. In fact, some actors weren't even sure that they were being recorded at the time, because he often, like, shot with a hidden camera approach. And one last note is that I just love the editing too, because, like, there's a lot of musical montages that are in place, and it almost, the way it's cut together almost feels like something that Spike Jonze would have shot in the 90s.
Yeah.
Like the beats and the unrefined camera movement and the energy on display.
Yeah.
And I guess before I go, I will say that I have to thank Adam from YourMovieSucks.com, who, like, really brought this movie to my attention, because he posted about it in his channel, and he even got to interview Matt Johnson himself.
Yeah.
So yeah, The Dirties is like the little movie that could, and I think it's very underrated.
Yeah. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but the last scene in this movie takes place in a hallway that in my senior year of high school, the hallway that the big climactic scene takes place in is the hallway where I went to writer's craft class every day. So just seeing that hallway in such a horrifying light gives me a lot of feels.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah.
It's really cool that you know the camera op and you were also in that school at the time, so that's very nice.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess Sean...
Moving along with you, Sean. What's your next choice?
Okay, good.
Here we go.
Okay, so if you're going to talk about Canadian cinema, there's one film in particular, and it's straight out of left field. And its origin is actually very unique. So back in around 2006, I would say, 2006, 7? Anyways, it was around the time when two directors, Tarantino and Rodriguez, were hosting this contest for Grindhouse trailers. So this is back when Air was coming out. This is back when Death was coming out as well. They also incorporated directors like Rob Zombie, like Roth, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah.
But with a shotgun was one of the trailers entered into the contest, and it won. And I forget what the prize was, but it ended up being financed into a $3 million feature. Now it's 100% Canadian, 100%, like, there's not a trace of American in it. And it's filmed all the way at Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. I've never been there, however, my friend Mariah told me that whenever she went to Dartmouth, Hobo with Shotgun was a lot like it. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that, but, you know.
Yeah.
Anyways, Hobo the Shotgun stars Rutger Hauer. Rutger Hauer, he was, like, from, like, the 80s. He all those B cheesy, super cheesy action movies. And anyway, and
Blade Runner.
he
Yes.
plays a fellow that goes into town and he's trying to buy a lawnmower.
Yeah.
He can't stand anybody else in that town, so he ends up buying a shotgun instead and just goes down, starts just annihilating everybody. And I won't spoil it for anybody, because I want everyone to see this. It was made with $3 million, and it was one of the most successful Canadian films it's ever had. Next to unless you want to get technical with CanCon, but
Yeah.
I would have to say that Hobo Show is probably one of the most successful Canadian films out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
That's cool. I think you made a joke. You made a joke before we started recording. Take a shot every time someone says Canada. We already tried that with shots with
The last episode we did. But yeah, I'm not doing that again. I'll be dead.
Yeah. So.
Is there anything else you want to say about Hobo Shotgun? Is there anything you particularly love about it?
Anything else I want to say? It's a huge gore fest.
Yeah.
With cheesy lines, but it's so good.
Yeah.
If you're having a bad day at work and you just want to just see people die in horrendous deaths, then you need to watch Hobo Shotgun.
Yeah.
I
I'll
agree.
probably be doing that after the time after we're done this podcast.
Good.
It's the healthy thing to do.
I still need to see it. I'm gonna have to watch it at some point.
Yeah, if you liked Grindhouse with Tarantino and Rodriguez, you should definitely give Hobo a Shotgun a try.
There's also one other thing I was going to add, but I can't think of it, so I'm just going to leave it at that.
If it comes back to you, just let us know and we'll go back to it.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Evan, I suppose you're next.
The next movie I want to talk about asks a very simple question. What would you do if you had 1 day, 1 year, or 1 week to live? Plot of this movie is... The movie I'm talking about is 1 week. The plot is Joshua Jackson plays a young school teacher who goes to a doctor's appointment and he is revealed that he has a diagnosis of stage 4 cancer. And his odds of living past 1 week from now, from the start of the story, do not look good. So, in a random act of spontaneity, he comes across this guy looking to, get a motorcycle, out of his garage. So, Ben just the band's name is Ben. Ben buys the motorcycle for a really cheap price, and then he decides to go on this road trip across the beautiful country of Canada. He starts in Toronto and he bikes all the way out to British Columbia. The plot of this movie is he goes searching for, his life's purpose. And because, in the Canadian healthcare system, he's faced with the option. He can either go into chemotherapy right away and just be prodded with medical equipment for the rest of his days, for however long he's fighting cancer, or he can get out and see the world and have a cathartic experience. He chooses to have a cathartic experience. Now, because this isn't set in the United States and he doesn't need health insurance, he doesn't have to cook crystal meth to pay gargantuan medical bills. So, basically, he buys a motorcycle, goes on this road trip. The subplot of the movie is he's set to marry his fiancée Samantha, and then that becomes a little complicated with this whole journey and the fact that he's terminal. But it's a beautiful movie. It makes you appreciate life. The very scenery of our country will make you appreciate life. That's my biggest takeaway from this movie. And it's kind of a short and sweet entry. There's really not that much I can say. It was made in 2008, directed by a fellow. I'm just pulling up my notes here. It was written and directed by a fellow named Michael McGowan, and it was actually produced by a man I've actually met named Avi Fettergreen. I met Avi at a conference at the Canadian Film Festival back in 2014, and he actually talked about his experience in producing this movie, and the love letters he got from audience members who knew someone who had cancer, who had cancer themselves, who watched this movie, and it actually made them really appreciate life. So, shortest review ever. 1 Week is a beautiful movie. Canada, the country of Canada, is the star of this movie, after Joshua Jackson, of course. Yeah, not too much else to say. Beautiful movie.
The idea of the story almost reminds me of something like what Terry Fox went through, where he went cross country after a bout with cancer. Not the same story exactly, but I see similarities.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, the whole cancer arc is really big there. I think the difference between Terry Fox though is
he walked.
He walked, and he also
did not have a motorbike.
He not only did he walk. For our American audience, Terry Fox was a guy who got cancer and had to have his leg amputated.
Yeah.
He walked across this country on a wooden stump for like 8.
Well, it was a
I guess you could say he ran the marathon.
He ran.
It was a marathon. Yes.
Yeah, like you can say, in my opinion, but
it was a prosthetic leg.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of biopics made about Terry Fox.
A handful. Haven't really stood the test of time.
One of them was actually called Terry Fox, and then I think the other one was just called Terry. And Terry was the one that came out. I think it was like
I'm gonna look this up now.
Wasn't Sean Ashmore the guy who played Terry in one of them? That's a good choice. Yeah.
Terry Fox biopic.
Yeah,
there was a film called Terry. Yeah, it was made in 2005. This is kind of like a sub-entry because 1 week was so short to talk about.
Yeah.
But yeah. So Terry, released in 2005. It's Sean Ashmore as Terry Fox.
Yes.
You're right. And I think the other one was called The Terry Fox Story. I'm just gonna look this up.
Yes. Like 1981, I think it was like just after that.
And
just after, yeah.
And in 1983, that was an American biographical film. So the Americans, I guess, were so inspired by this Canadian who ran the marathon that they decided to make a movie. Like, it was apparently worthy of their attention. That's pretty cool.
I'm surprised the story hasn't been tackled more. He's quite an inspirational figure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but what are your thoughts on Argo, very quickly? Because that was
kind of marginalizes the Canadians.
Yeah, it basically took a situation that Canadians played a much bigger role in and Americanized it, where they had to have the CIA come in and save the day, when it was really Canada that did most of the work.
Yeah.
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah.
You can't see it, but Sean's really shaking his head.
Yeah.
And rolling his eyes.
Yeah, on the webcam.
It's like watching the fucking Exorcist right here.
Yeah. So.
And there's no. There was like, okay, I'm just gonna fucking add to your tangent. Number one, they added what's his name? He was in Titanic. He played Mr. Andrews.
Not Ray Fiennes.
Ray Fiennes was in Titanic.
He was in Argo. He had a small role in Argo as like the Canadian ambassador, right?
Yeah.
That dude maybe got 10 lines out of the whole fucking movie.
Yeah.
Out of the whole movie, and then the rest of it was Brad Pitt trying to figure out how he's gonna get back home to his wife. Like that's literally the whole fucking movie.
Yeah.
And then all the subplots is just about how Iran is a terribly run country when U.S. was the one that interfered to begin with.
Precisely.
Anyway, yeah.
I cannot. You cannot even.
Like the only thing I liked was the Star Wars references.
I will say words that Mr. Trump will hear and fucking nuke my ass. All right.
Yeah. Just so you're aware, Sean, this episode's going to premiere 2 days after the election, so cut this bit out. He might not even be president by the time we're listening, so we're gonna, yeah.
We'll see.
I'm gonna say this just for editing purposes that, and if the orange turd hears about it, there's not a goddamn thing he can do about it.
Yeah, put that in. If Trump loses, keep that audio clip. Yeah. So we have a contingency plan.
Okay.
There you go.
So, by the way, so going back to...
can I go to mine?
Yeah, what's your next? Sorry, Lyle.
Yeah.
We've been kind of going off topic here.
Yeah.
My next pick is Mommy, directed by Javier Dolan.
Great movie.
Sorry if I mispronounced his name. I had to look up tutorials on YouTube, and each and every tutorial was wrong. There's like 10 tutorials, and I would say his name. They have like a text-to-speech machine say his name. It's like Xavier Dolan, or Xavier Dolan. And I'm like, no, I think it's pronounced differently because he is a French Canadian director.
Yeah.
Yes, Molly. Mommy is excellent. The plot is it's a mother struggling to raise her mentally unstable son, and because of this, she enlists a tutor to help reach to him. Because in this film, there's this fictitious law that states that if you're in a low-income household and you have a troubled youth in your family, you are allowed to. I'm not sure if you're allowed or if it's like required that you send them to be taken care of by the state.
The state of Quebec, or is it the Canadian government?
I'm not sure.
Well, it's the province of Quebec.
Yeah.
It just means the government takes care of them.
Yeah.
Rather viciously, I may add. This was shot on a budget of $4.9 million in Longueuil, Quebec. And the most interesting aspect of how it's shot would be within its aspect ratio, which is not something most people pay attention to, but with this film it's very, very clear. It's shot in a 1:1 ratio, which means that everything is shot in a perfect square, as opposed to a rectangle.
Didn't mid-90s that Jonah Hill's directorial did do something similar?
They did something slightly similar. I don't think it was 1.1.
Grand Budapest Hotel, actually. Wes
Yeah.
Anderson.
Oh.
Yeah.
He did one well.
Yeah.
So cool. It's not a very common ratio, but it's interesting. It's it's often called the Instagram ratio as well by some people.
Yeah.
But anyways, Dolan stated that he wanted to do this ratio, and he was aware that people would call him pretentious for it, but he felt that the aspect ratio was far more intimate, and it helped him give the viewers the lens of a very small family in a very small place in their lives. And it's not all shot in 1:1. There's actually this really fascinating scene. And he often changes the ratio in this film whenever there's like a really hopeful moment or a montage that shows what life could have been or what life, like things are getting better, that kind of idea. Where there's one moment where the main character spreads his hands out and the ratio actually adjusts as he's opening the screen.
Is that when Wonderwall starts playing?
Yes, it's during the iconic Wonderwall montage, which is probably the best scene in the movie, if I'm being honest. This film was quite an emotional roller coaster. And seeing the anger, this young man that they got is so good at displaying like bursts of anger and energy. Like he's like a time bomb. Like he's completely uncontrollable. And like it's one thing to see him get like furious, but to see his mother furious at him for being furious is like really hard to watch sometimes. It's not to say the movie's entirely dour though. There's a lot of like there's some scenes at which they really get along, or they share like tender moments together. It's not all like, sad. The ending is even the ending is somewhat optimistic, despite the twists and turns that happen by the end. Because I don't want to give it away, but admittedly I've only seen this once, but I was very impressed by how well it was made and how fluid the camera work was despite being entirely handheld. And I can actually understand why this got like a 12-13 minute standing ovation at Cannes, and why it's often considered one of the best films shot in this country. So yes, definitely 100% worth watching.
That's, I remember...
Evan, I know you've seen this. Sean, have you seen Mommy? No?
Yeah.
I know of it. I just never had resources to actually check it out. So
A lot of good films in Canada are shot in Quebec. Actually, I feel like it's just like the French DNA of cinema that trails into them.
it's I don't think it's that. I think it's just something a lot more simple. It's just the fact that Quebec markets their films better.
Yeah. Let's not get ahead of ourselves because my third and final pick is going to be about a movie directed by a francophone Canadian.
All right.
Yeah.
That's
That's cool though. Yeah, no, Quebec is just killing it with their entries into the Canadian film
My
market.
next one was also francophone as well. Actually.
Oh yeah.
very cool. Good transition then.
Yeah. Although this one is it's along the lines of Mommy, but this one I feel though it also involves like family, but it also goes into a different spectrum because this film, instead of focusing on the child being in control, it actually focuses on child abuse, which is
Yeah.
a very controversial, it's something that nobody wants to talk about
Yeah.
for some reason. And I don't blame people. Anyway, what attracted me to this film was actually how simple every camera movement, of dialogue, of the story. It's just how simple, and that's why I really like it because the director Luc Dion, he just wanted it simple. He wanted it just a simple, straightforward story, right? And with Aurore, it's actually really cool because in the first half we see the little girl, Aurore Gagnon, I believe that's her name.
Yeah.
You see her in two phases of her life. You see her where she still has her perfect family, and then it transitions into literally an entire different reality because within that transition, her mother dies of tuberculosis, her father remarries like the second cousin, and then she moves in with like 4 of her children, and then 3 of them already ended up dying due to like dysentery, abuse, malnourishment, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And then when it transitioned to Aurore being a lot older, she's starting to have a lot of backlash against her parental figures, which is her father and her stepmother. Her stepmother ruled everything. She was like the queen of the household, but she also ruled with a very violent fist, right? And
Yeah.
Aurore's personality, she was the kind of person that actually wanted like just to be independent. She just wanted her family back. Like literally all she did, she beaten herself, like she was beaten with a hot fire poker. She was beaten with like a 2x4 with a nail in it. She was tied up into a room for like 2 weeks on end. Like this is a true story too. Like this poor girl, like she was fucking hell and back, and she ended up passing away due to her injuries.
So that's 3 movies in this podcast that are based on true stories. Holy shit.
Yeah, and this whole time you're trying to understand why no one's doing nothing to help this girl. And the truth of the matter is that it's about in my opinion, it's about 3 things. It's about society, it's about family, and it's also about reputation, right? Alright, so you have to keep your reputation within your family in order to hold it up to society. It all coagulates together until the little girl dies. And then it's like, fuck you, you're going to prison, you're going to die for the rest, you're going to go to prison for the rest of your life, you're going to die. Like, the mother ended up passing away, I think, like, 15 years, because she ended up catching, what did she catch?
You said tuberculosis, didn't you?
Once? No. The biological mother passed away from
tuberculosis.
Oh, okay. Then she died, I think she died from dysentery or something like that. It was this is going back to, like, the early 1900s, right? And in some of the areas in Quebec, Aurore's story is still being told. It's still being passed on. Where it's like, no, you have to remember that no matter what, you have children. Your job as a parent is supposed to protect those children. It's not supposed to exploit them. It's not supposed to it's not supposed to treat them as they're human garbage.
Yeah.
And the film is so. Like it you need.
Yeah.
I would honestly reference it to like the American version of The Color Purple. That's just from like an emotional standpoint. That's how heavy this film is, and I recommend it if you have a strong enough stomach for it.
There are two. Yeah, The Color Purple, which I still need to watch because you talked about it on a couple episodes ago.
Yeah.
And another movie don't ask how I was reminded of this, but the movie Sucker Punch came up in my mind because that movie is all about, a girl who loses her family and goes through an alternate mental state. Except this movie, Aurore, sounds like it has a more focused narrative than Sucker.
Like Aurora, for what you mean.
Aurora.
No. Aurora. So
Aurora.
Like Aurora. Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Aurora, yeah. So Sucker Punch has an unfocused narrative, but this movie you're talking about does sound like it has a more focused narrative.
Yeah.
And Sucker Punch was just, torture fantasy porn. This sounds like it's more the real deal.
This film, in my opinion, if you want people to learn what a child goes through when it comes to poor parenting, this is the movie you need to see.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the best way I can describe it. If you ever need to, if you're a social worker, you need to study how parents behave, really behave when no one's watching.
Yeah.
This is the movie where it's worst case scenario.
Yeah.
I see.
It was so sweet too. I highly recommend it.
Yeah.
I was sort of reminded of Room when you guys were talking about this, just to hear someone being imprisoned in a room for so long, or being abused for I assume years on end.
Yeah.
Not the same age year.
I think with the Aurora story, I think it lasts 2 years, something like that.
That's a long time to be
The
abused.
movie didn't really show. The movie only showed a progression of it, obviously, for films. But I think the true story, it was 2 years.
Yeah, that's well. Room is kind of like the antithesis of this because yes, Room deals with.
It ends with a hopeful ending.
Yeah, Room has a lot more of a hopeful ending. Room quite honestly was set in Toronto, shot here too, but it doesn't get points.
Anyways.
Yeah. Anyway,
it's not. Okay, so carrying on. Is that are those your notes on the
Aurora?
Yeah.
Aurora. Okay. 11. We'll continue on with your next pick.
Okay. There are two things you need to understand about Canadian culture. We love hockey, and there has always been a cultural rivalry between English-speaking Canadians and French-speaking Canadians who are predominantly from Quebec. This is an action comedy about both of those things, and it is so brilliantly done. Case in point, Bon Cop, Bad Cop. It's a 2006 action comedy, as I've said, directed by Eric Canuel. I don't know if sorry if I mispronounced your name correctly, sir, but
You got the accent down.
Great movie. The plot of this movie is in the most hilarious fashion possible. A murder takes place on the provincial border of Ontario and Quebec. Colm Farror is a detective from, I guess, Toronto, who is
Toronto.
Yeah, he's a detective from Toronto who is dispatched to investigate this murder, and a French detective. I'm trying to find the actor who plays him. Patrick Howard. Yeah. Patrick Howard. Patrick Howard plays the French detective who is all... Now, Colm Farror's character is all, professional, uptight,
Pretty straight.
He's very seasoned. He's been doing this for a long time. This guy is all young, sexy, suave, doesn't give a fuck.
Oh, he's a wild card.
Yeah, he's the wild card. So it's the uptight, guy who gets things done, and the wild card who does whatever he wants. The wild card's from Quebec, the uptight guy's from Ontario. So they have to work together to solve a murder, and it revolves around a hockey tournament, and that's where the climax of the movie is. But along the way, they have to do all kinds of crazy shit to find the killer of the body who they find on the border of Ontario and Quebec. And the funniest scene in this movie for me is when they track a lead to a house where pot is being grown. Now, this is the mid-2000s, so legal weed in Canada was still about a decade away from being policy. But the scene where, like, they set the place ablaze, and then they walk away from this house stoned off their asses, and the inspector, who is French Canadian, is swearing at them and screaming at them in French, and they're just sitting there. They're just laughing. It's so funny. Oh god! And another iconic scene that stands out to me that actually has fantastic editing is while Mr. Sexy French guy is getting it on with Colm Farrell's what was sister.
Yeah.
He's investigating the guy who is breaking into their house, trying to shoot them and get them off the case and try to take care of them. So basically, the editing in between this sex scene and Colm Farrell snooping around the house is so masterfully done. It's just great filmmaking, and like I said, the big climax of this movie revolves around a hockey game, which is the perfect analogy for the Canadian culture. When French Canadians and English-speaking Canadians have to work together and get along to get something done, hilarity ensues. That's the plot of this movie. It's so much fun. I feel bad that I'm recording this episode and I have not yet seen the sequel.
Oh, I to be honest, I actually think I like the sequel just a little bit more.
Yeah.
Because, like, in the first movie, they're always quarreling, but in the second movie, they have a little bit more respect for each other. And they even get, it has a much bigger, there's far bigger stakes involved. Because the whole idea is that there's these car bombs that are being built and being shipped all across Canada. And there's like a sequence that's triggered via satellite that sets them off. So then they have to discover who's sending these and why. There's one hilarious bit where the French detective has to drive this loaded car off they're on like the border between the U.S. and Canada.
Oh,
he has
okay.
to launch it off a bridge that's like right in between the country, and he launches it, gets away, but he's arrested by the U.S.
Oh,
and
and
they think he's a terrorist because they can't understand or identify his accent.
Oh, God.
And the cops are
I saw that in the trailer, actually. Yeah, I saw Bon Cop Bad Cop when I was in high school, and it was like when it first came out, and it was shit, like a Canadian version of Lethal Weapon, right? And that's
Yes,
how
Canadian Lethal Weapon.
Yeah, basically.
We actually, the funniest part about it is that when I watched it, we were in high school and nobody knew that sex scene was going to happen.
Oh.
Let's just say I had to finish watching the movie at home instead of at school.
Busted.
I hate when that... It happens in high school, and you hate when it happens, but it does happen. On a similar story about Passchendaele, I watched Passchendaele in history class, and then my history teacher, who was the cheesiest guy, but we loved him. He was the cheesiest guy ever. He had a sense of humor. When there's a scene where Paul Gross's character makes love to his sweetheart right before he goes off to war, and then my teacher was like, "Okay, guys, due to passionate Passchendaele, we're gonna skip this," and then everyone booed, but I had to watch that scene later on. But yeah,
You
that
can
was a
watch people getting mutilated in war,
I
but you can't
hated
watch
that.
people have sex.
yeah, I don't get that. Yeah, Lyle makes a good point. Violence and intestines being spilled on the battlefield. Okay. A sex scene that isn't that revealing.
Watching a horse drown in mud.
Oh, I forgot about that scene. What is this? The Never-Ending Story 2.0?
Yeah. But the one thing about that sex scene in Passchendaele is that I hated it because that, like, for me, it's like, you do not have sex when there's fucking cannons shooting off into fucking German lines.
Yeah, that was awesome.
That was my big annoyance with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Evan, I highly recommend you watch Bon Cop Bad
Yeah.
Cop too.
I will.
It's
That's my homework. Like, you're gonna watch Hobo with a Shotgun after this. I'm watching the
Actually, I
sequel.
think you're watching Bon Cop Bad Cop 2 now.
Oh wow! I'm gonna have to check this out.
It's an impeccably worthy sequel to the first one.
I believe it. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think we've demonstrated that come to watch some Canadian films. There is some damn good stuff.
Yeah.
Here.
And that's why I wanted to wrap this up with on my note with Videodrome, directed by one of the greatest Canadian directors of all time, David Cronenberg.
Yeah.
We got everyone's going yes.
Yes.
And how do I break this down? I guess the way I'll start is that a CD television broadcaster comes in contact with a rogue frequency on a UHF station called Videodrome, and it's a now this guy is like, he's searching for like edgy shit. He's looking for stuff that'll push the boundaries and flip people's lids, you know. And it's like this Videodrome shows like images of like violence and murder and sexual deviancy, and this guy's kind of turned on by it, as well as his lady friend, and he wants to broadcast the program. But since he's come in contact with Videodrome, it really starts to warp his mind, and he begins to hallucinate, and he's not quite sure what's real or not. His mind begins to lose its grip on reality. Until to the point where there's like these two factions of people, one who wants to weaponize Videodrome and one who wants to destroy Videodrome. And he becomes like almost an assassin for both parties because he's infected. His body starts to morph. He grows like this abdomen VCR, a VAG-CR. And then you put a Betamax in him and he'll do anything you say.
Oh, wow.
And there's this, his hand turns into a biological gun where it's like the metal starts to seep through into his veins. And with this gun he can shoot like cancer cells which morph your body and destroy it from the inside out. Videodrome is really fucked up and gross.
Yeah.
But more than anything, that's what I adore about it. I adore how weird it can be. I really appreciate some of the ideas it has. And despite its lean runtime, it's packed with so many like concepts with like media and like how like desensitization can happen if we're not careful, and how society can become like really grotesque if we're not like.
Yeah, we're seeing that right now, right?
Yeah.
If we're not monitoring ourselves on what we watch, and like how we're just like slowly becoming like nullified by it all.
Yeah.
One thing I really like is one thing I noticed like in the movie. I just watched it tonight, like some of it, and like everyone like it's all they ever talk about and it's all they ever do. There's even like this homeless shelter where homeless people can just go in and get their fix by binging television that they don't get because they don't own one.
That's crazy.
There's one homeless guy standing outside before Max goes to assassinate someone. He's got a television and it runs on batteries. Like, hey man, can you give me some money? It's cold out there, Teddy. It's killing the batteries and I can't get my fix. Like, people are almost addicted to television. It's insane. The main character, Max Wren, is played by a totally awesome James Woods. And almost every scene he's in, he's always like unsure of exactly what's happening. He's always got like, he'll wake up and it's like, there's a body in my bed. Hey, buddy, get over here. I need your help. Take pictures. I think there's a body in my bed. And it's like, there's nothing here. It's like, oh god, I'm hallucinating. I'm losing. I need coffee. I don't know. And then, but like as soon as he becomes like a programmed assassin, which I think is a fascinating idea, he becomes like this cold-hearted killer, and he has like a really badass weapon. And it's not often that I see Canadian movies that do this, that have this level of intense gore where you see a guy's head explode and get ripped apart by tumors. Or you know, I don't see anything. That was such a good scene. Death to Videodrome, long live the new flesh. Yeah. Mic drop. And or even that, my favorite shot would have to be when like Debbie Harris, I think her name is. The lady from Blondie. Deborah Harris, I think. Yeah, the lady from Blondie. And she's like on the television. He's like, "Come here, lover." And the TV starts like undulating, and it's looking like it's turning into like human flesh and stuff. And her lips are right onto the screen. And James Woods just like dips his head inside of the screen and kind of like canoodles with it and puts his hands.
Debbie Harry is
Debbie Harry.
Debbie Harry.
I thought so. Yeah, and he puts his hands all over, and it's like, oh, that's such an interesting shot. And the special effects were done by a real technical wizard named Rick Baker, who did stuff like An American Werewolf in London. He's like amazing. And despite the fact that it is a crew, of mainly 20-year-olds with not that much experience, they were able to pull off some really neat stuff. And, like, there's this one story I read where it's, like, the last scene of the movie where, like, Max sees a television screen and it's prompting him to kill himself, and then the TV explodes into guts. I sound like a total gore hound right now, but what they did was they went to a deli or some butcher shop, and they got all these, like, you know, intestines and like, gore and all these, like, organs that were just laying around. They took them and they put them in a freezer. Well, actually, no, they presumed that the room would be cold enough overnight to just leave it there, because they shot it in the winter, and it wasn't kept properly, so it was spoiled by the time they got shooting it. So, the whole room was stinky the whole day they were shooting that scene.
Isn't that kind of similar to what happened in Day of the Dead?
Yes.
With Captain Rhodes?
Yeah, but in that situation, the freezer broke down.
Friday the 13th movies as well. Tom Savini, he actually used pig guts and all that stuff too, and he actually intentionally kept them spoiled.
Oh,
just
God.
to torture their actors?
Not well, that too, but like, the thing about him is that he had a mind. He knew what real gore looked like, right? Like, he was a veteran. And
yeah.
He went through the big war. You know what I mean? And that was still fresh in his mind. And then he took that and he made great visual effects with it. Sorry to get completely upside track.
No, that's cool, because we're talking about visual effects. But yeah, Rick Baker did an excellent job with this. And I'm very sad that initially it wasn't really that successful to a wide audience. Like, it kind of flopped, actually. And then Cronenberg was like... It came out in 1983, and right after it was finished, Cronenberg went on to do The Dead Zone, which went with greater success. He had an interesting career. Most of his films aren't that successful, but they're still impeccably interesting to watch. And I'm very glad that Videodrome got the recognition that it so dearly deserved. Mm-hmm. I would personally go so far to say that's probably my favorite work of his, because I was kind of calculating in my mind, like, what should I talk about? I can't talk about The Fly because it's not a Canadian movie, sadly. But I could have talked about Scanners or A History of Violence or Dead Ringers, which I recently just saw. But it was this one that just opened my eyes the widest. You know, the television...
Actually, he also did a little bit of acting. I don't know if you actually know that, but he acted in this film called Nightbreed.
Oh, yeah, he was like the guy with the creepy mask, and he hunted after the monsters.
Have you seen it?
I've seen the clip with him in it. I also saw a clip of him...
It's like... It's got a lot of Clive Barker in it, too. Where it's like a lot of, like, spiritual demons and, you know, like, kind of, like, crazy shit. But, like, when you add, like, Cronenberg, he just, like, creep. Like, solid fucking creep. In the first frame you see him, no idea who he is, but, like, as soon as you see him, you just, like, the back of your hair, like, the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, you get fucking goosebumps, you're just like, holy fuck, this guy is going to kill somebody, and it's going to be evidence.
Yes.
But,
yeah.
And yeah, Cronenberg, yes, and you know what, another really great film of his too is Crash. I don't know if you've ever seen
I've yet to, that's still on my list, but yeah, it's one of the few that's left to...
That was that Best Picture winner, right?
No, you're thinking of the Tom Haggis movie.
Oh, Paul Haggis.
Paul Haggis.
Crash was a 1996, it's literally like car crashes and sex. That's literally all it is.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But it's got like, oh god.
It's got James Spader, Holly Hunter.
James Spader, Holly Hunter, Roxana Arquette, the dude that played Casey in the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. What's his name?
I'm gonna look this up.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Absolutely phenomenal. Very well done film. And it's set in Los Angeles, unfortunately. But but that's also just like a testament to how great Cronenberg is.
Elias Cortez. He's Casey Jones.
Yeah, Elias Cortez. Yeah, him. But Crash is in. But again, when you're looking at all of other Cronenberg's works, that's where you're talking about the Videodrome, where it's like Videodrome was like his big, like it kicked down a lot of doors for him. Right? Like that was his first taste of success. And the fact that even now, like in my personal opinion, he was actually ahead of his game, ahead of his time, when he came out with Videodrome, right?
Yes.
because that came out in like '83. So you like he was going up against like the Freddy's, the Michael, the Sleepaway Camps, the like everything that, and he made his own little film that still, in my opinion, holds up a lot better than any one of those other films that came out in the '80s. If you actually think, and I think that's a lot due to the visual effects that you're talking about, but I think it's more to do with how Cronenberg is a director and how he's able to take a frame or a story and actually like retain its essence, and he's actually able to preserve that essence for like however long it's. So we're almost coming up 40 years since Videodrome, so like it's still a cult classic to this day. Like, I'm sorry, that to me says like one of the best Canadian films, in my opinion.
The level of creativity on display in that film was rather inspiring, especially as a fellow Torontonian. I'm happy to know that something as unique as that was shot there. You even see a shot of the CN Tower while he's walking down. I thought, I know that place. I mean, I like I personally want more films like this to exist. I want films that dare to be different or challenge the audience in ways that are far from expected. And I think everyone on Videodrome did a top-notch job, and that's why I picked it for last in my picks.
And I think it's also going back to like the saturation of Canadian cinema, just because you also have to think that also came back in 1983. You also had great classic films like Porky's. You still had like Meatballs,
Heavy Metal.
Dan Aykroyd, who was coming out of it, he ended up doing Ghostbusters. Actually, ironically enough, Dan Aykroyd also played Max Sennett in the Chaplin biopic. How appropriate is that, right? Yeah, I don't know if that many people remember it, but yeah, and I think with Videodrome, it's one of those few films that we are very thankful that we're able to call Canadian, because it does stand out, but compared to all the other stuff that's come out after that, to me, it's very saturated. So I feel like Videodrome, is a little bit more sentimental than most other Canadian films.
Yeah, it's great. Well, Canada, guys.
Yeah.
We have talked great length of some of our favorite Canadian films, and some of which I think all of us would say you must see.
Sean, I want to kind of prod you here for a second, because we were talking way before this pandemic happened about Denis Villeneuve. He's making the Doom remake, which we now have to wait another year to see. But
you got postponed?
Yeah, it's not coming out this month.
Fucking shit.
I know. Our friend Cody had some words for that too, and
choice words. Yes.
Yeah. So basically, when we were talking about how you have a theory about what needs to happen, with the money that movie will gross inevitably, because it has such a cult following, and it's by a Canadian director. What do you think Denis should do with that money? Like, and the producer should do with that money to Canadian content and for Canadian content?
Honestly, as much as I would love to see Denis put that money back into Canadian content, I feel like it's just going to be another James Cameron situation where, James Cameron did a lot of great stuff for Canada, but he ended up just jumping ship in the States.
No pun intended.
No pun intended.
The propeller.
You know what? Actually, okay. Hold on. One quick. I'll wrap this up about Denis, because he's made great films. He made Polytechnique, we mentioned earlier, On Sundays, and then he started getting into the studio stuff like Blade Runner
and Arrival,
and he didn't do Annihilation, did he?
No, that was what's his?
The guy who wrote Dread.
Alex Garland.
Yes. I heard. But yeah, I think that if he does get a lot, because I honestly feel like a lot of the money just end up going right back to the studio. Especially because of COVID. You know what I mean? It's costed them how many hundreds of millions of dollars. It's I can't see a penny of that coming to Canadian content, unfortunately. Like,
Yeah. Well, hopefully
Who financed Dune?
the studio. Check
Yeah.
this out.
It's a Canadian, Hungarian, United Kingdom, United States collaboration, and it's distributed by Warner Brothers.
Yeah, so Canada did put up some money for this.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not the only ones though.
Yeah.
Hungary.
Well, but you know why? CanCon. They got a tax break for it. Warner Brothers is. It's all. Oh no! I think all that money's gonna go back to Warner Brothers. Unfortunately, if it was 100% like the only, I think the only true studios I think that actually contribute, like truly contribute, is obviously Netflix and Amazon, because they're the ones that are actually fronting Canadian stories, Canadian content, Canadian actors, Canadian directors, Canadian actresses, etc., etc., etc. And they're the ones that are actually bringing more Canadian content to the screen, which is wonderful because I don't know if you guys remember from the fucking 90s, but in order to see a Canadian film, you had to go to the fucking foreign film section.
Yeah. Which is bullshit because we live here.
We were literally just talking about a movie where it was filmed in your fucking high school. And the fact that it's in a foreign film section, give me a goddamn movie.
Yeah.
Asshole fucks.
My backyard.
Fucking
Ain't no foreign film.
Yeah.
And you know what? Like, and all the respect to Denise as well, because he is a truly, truly, truly amazing filmmaker. Like, he's made some, and I feel like he's part of like I want to call it like a new wave of directors now, because now we have really great like young guys now, like Dennis. We have Damien Chazelle. We've got Alex Garland. We got Bryan Singer. He's got some great films now too.
Ryan Coogler.
Ryan Coogler, yeah. Like the industry's starting to show like a new wave of director, and I'm actually very happy that Villeneuve is part of that, because and I feel like he's gonna be like I don't want to compare him, but I feel like he's gonna be like the next David Fincher in regards to like just like his visual aspect of it.
I can see that comparison.
With Fincher, it was all about visual. Yes, he knows how to tell a great story, but at the same time, when you see a particular shot of his, it's like, oh, Fincher movie, done. That's 7. That's Fight Club. Yeah, you know what I mean. But with Villeneuve is that he's able, especially with fucking someone like Roger Deakins, genius. He's able to not only bring the right contrast, light, the right color, temperature, you know what I mean? Villeneuve is able to actually like capture that, and not a lot of directors can do that nowadays. Especially with natural light. Everyone now resorts to post. Everyone now resorts to After Effects and CGI and post. Where Villeneuve, he actually, just by the way his frames look, it actually looks practical. Like, yes, a lot of special effects still go into his stuff, but he still retains that practical, cinematic, old school film look, which I love. Yeah. Which is making me really excited for the Dune remake.
Yeah.
I don't get excited for remakes, but this one I feel should be. Actually, that's what you should do. That you guys should do that. Next podcast, you guys should do like which films should be remade and which ones should not.
Oh, there's gonna be. I'm gonna have to make mention of a couple of Disney films because I was gonna save this for a Disney episode, but to give you an idea, I feel like some of the Disney remakes are unnecessary because they are remaking movies that were already good. Take a movie that is either underrated. My point exactly. We'll save that for the Disney episode, but there are movies like Atlantis Lost Empire or Treasure Planet that if they got live action remakes, which apparently Atlantis may have a remake on the way.
They're trying to get Tom Holland.
Tom Holland is Milo Thatch, which I think is wrong. Andrew Garfield.
I think Andrew Garfield would have been better.
Yeah. The Rock would be Dr. Sweet, you know? Name Sweet. Joshua Sweet. Medical officer. That would be great. And Danny DeVito is Mole.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm the trash man. I take garbage and I throw it everywhere.
But you have to have a French accent.
I'm the trash man. I take the garbage. I start the blasting.
We've yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's yeah, no, that would be a good. That is a good idea for an episode. Movies that should have remakes or should be remade, because I feel like Disney notwithstanding, there's a lot of stuff out there that I think is worthy of a good remake and should be remade.
Disney is just, they're just out to make money, you know.
Pretty much, yeah.
They just bought 20th Century Fox for $50 billion. Like, they need to make that back.
And the first thing they're doing is rebooting Home Alone. God damn.
Oh, no.
That was like one of the first things they announced. That was one of the first projects they announced after the merger.
Yeah.
I was so mad.
I gotta say, like, Dune has been waiting for a proper adaptation for, like, a very, very long time.
Yeah.
It's a very hard source material to adapt. And I can actually understand Villeneuve's reason for splitting it off into two parts, because it's such an expansive universe. So yeah, no, it's looking great. Like, I think it's going to be a fantastic adaptation.
Yeah,
and I'm sure it'll more than likely surpass David Lynch's film in the 80s.
So I have a question. Since we're talking about remakes and multiple adaptations of a certain
to do the topic.
Yeah, sorry. One last thing. We're talking about remakes. It's just a quick question I have. Do you think the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings films count as remakes? Because Ralph Bakshi had an animated movie that was technically the first cinema. No, they're their own thing.
The way I see it is that that's okay. So that's like calling Hitchcock's The Lady Vanishes and Jodie Foster's Flight Plan a remake.
Right.
It's truth be told, like, it is the same story. Like, there's no way of getting around it, but it's just different variations. It's too different. You know what I mean? Same thing I would consider with the Lord of the Rings, because one, it's Peter fucking Jackson, and he made fucking 12 hours of that shit.
Yeah.
Two, he had I forget how much the animated movie cost, but it was like peanuts compared to what Jackson
Oh yeah,
made.
for sure. And there was only one animated movie. Peter Jackson had 3.
No, there was 2 animated movies.
Oh, there were?
They did Lord of the Rings and I believe The Return of the King.
A separate... That was a different animation director that made Return of the King. It wasn't Ralph Bakshi, but yes, there were 2 animated Lord of the Rings movies. The first movie covers Fellowship and Towers, and then leaves it at that.
Yeah. But, yeah, no, 2 totally different, yeah.
Based on the same material with different adaptions entirely.
That's what I was getting at, so... So it's not technically a remake, it's its own separate entity. Fair enough, okay.
No one's going to see it because they have the Peter Jackson version, so...
Yeah. The only reason I know the Ralph Bakshi film exists is because I used to listen to Channel Awesome a lot, and Doug Walker did a comparison of the Peter Jackson films to the Ralph Bakshi movie. But yeah. So anyways, yeah, this has been fun. Just Canadian content and everything that goes with it. I hope some of the stuff we talked about tonight gives you an idea of what our country's capable of. So tonight, like, we gave you the Canadian equivalent of cinematic masterpieces like The Right Stuff, Lethal Weapon, and everything in between. And not only do we have the Canadian equivalent of iconic Hollywood movies, we also have movies that are iconic in their own right, that stand apart from Hollywood. So, the term Hollywood North is becoming increasingly popular around our film community, and I believe there's some real power in that. So, thanks for listening as we talked about some of these gems, and hopefully this gives you an idea of what's out there and broadens your horizons a bit. So I guess we'll call it a night. This has been fun.